kind of going a little bit more down the path of collaborative efforts, a collaboration really is a process where parties see different aspects of a problem. They need to explore solutions beyond just their vision. So we're bringing people in from a different point of view and seeing the solutions from that point of view as well. Stakeholders do not have full understanding of the issues, so not everybody understands the full depth or breadth of the problem or issue, and we want to bring in additional help to really round that out. And then you got to make sure we're flexible regarding intended outcomes. So while we want to be specific in identifying those, we also need to understand that other people have different points of view, and we need to be flexible regarding those. What I like to say is keep the eye on the prize. Remember, the grand goal of the collaborative effort is to address a major issue or a significant or specific issue. It's not to get into details on the weeds or whatnot. So when we look at partnering between public service agents, citizens, private sector, and nonprofit sector, we want to think about what partnering really is. So it's a working relationship. So there's a high level of communication and cooperation. There's a high level of trust. So I call it the noble intent. Everybody's got noble intent. So you may disagree with how they're doing it or what they're saying, but everybody's in it for the right reason. Close cooperation. Again, that's working closely together to identify those goals and aim specifically toward those goals, and with good communication. And you want to accomplish mutually beneficial outcomes. So that's, when we talk about close cooperation and a level of trust, we're looking at what are those outcomes that are going to be beneficial to both organizations or departments or whatnot, and work toward those. When we think about partnering, so that's a very specific way to look at collaboration, right? Partnering is built on incentives and information exchange between parties. So sometimes, in a lot of cases, there's some contractual relationship. So it's a form of contracting, but it's not binding. It's not a binding contractual agreement. Some people call stuff like a memorandum of understanding. It's a self-enforcing agreement. So we work together to solve more complex problems or deliver services with the understanding that we're both in it for the right reasons. Again, assume noble intent. Next, we're going to look at contracting services. And a contract is an act of paying a fee for a specific service. In some ways, we'll call this outsourcing. So really, we're looking at what services or other programs can we offer via a third party. So we call that a contractor for a specific price. And so those can vary in what that contract looks like. But you want to be very specific in what the deliverables are. The contractor will do X, Y, and Z, and they will get this amount of money. The more specific you can be, the more likely you are to be happy with the outcome. Then we'll move on to cooperative agreements among local government entities. So let's look at a couple of characteristics here. First one is generally agreements between two government or nonprofit agencies concerning a single activity. So these agreements are going to be very specific in scope. Generally, it's going to pertain to services rather than facilities. So facilities are usually under the scope of one agency, and then we look at services to solve a social issue or address a social issue more so than the facility. So the agreement pertains to the service. Number 3, they're not permanent. So there's usually a specific time frame or a specific need that gets addressed, and once that time frame expires or that need is addressed, the agreement's done. They can contain provisions for future renegotiation or termination. So at any point in there that something may change, which it can, there can be a renegotiation of the contract or cooperative agreement, I should say, or termination. If something doesn't work out, then there is a termination clause for all parties involved. And the termination clause can be different for each party as well, depending on the contract. The cooperative agreement, it is a contract of sorts. You can have stand-in provisions that come into effect under certain conditions. So again, depending on what the services or facilities in play are here, depending if something, if A happens, then B will be set into place, or if C happens, D will be in place. It really depends on what they're looking at. And a lot of times this is when they anticipate something happening, or, in general, if you're dealing with outside stuff and you have to go inside, so there's some weather clauses and stuff like that. Number 6, permitted by state legislation that authorizes a cooperation among among government entities. So remember that you have to be allowed to cooperate in order to cooperate, right? So in some cases, this is not allowed. So the government entities will not be allowed to enter cooperative agreements with other government entities, but most likely they usually are the ones that do services for the local community anyway. Let's look at the collaborative model I have set up here from left to right. The first one is antecedents. This is where we take a partnering approach to service delivery. We look at what's motivating us to collaborate, and then we look at what are the common values and the common vision we have as our organizations. Next, we'll move to problem setting, where we recognize that there are different stakeholders and we need to identify who those are. We'll have or develop a common problem definition and develop a consensus on legitimate stakeholders that we want to work with. And then with that, we'll identify perceived benefits to the stakeholders. So what are the outcomes for the folks most affected? Then we'll move to direction setting, where we'll establish goals, set ground rules, do a joint information search, and then we start to explore options and organize subgroups or subcommittees to help identify and work towards solutions. Then third, we'll look at structuring. So this is where we formalize relationships. We look at different roles being assigned. We identify and elaborate on tasks. So what are specific things we need to do? And with that, sometimes goals and objectives and stuff like that. And then we're going to look at monitoring systems or control systems to kind of give us checkpoints overall. And then finally, we'll start delivering programs. We'll identify the impacts and outcomes or benefits, as it says here, derived from those programs, and debrief from there. A collaboration or a partnership does require stakeholders to be involved in a process. So with each collaboration or partnership, I think you should identify 4 specific areas and have them agreed upon, right? The one is your overall agreement in place, or your memorandum of understanding. Identify common goals, identify and write down an implementation plan, and then also, just as important, is to identify a way to evaluate if the collaboration or partnership has been successful. Here we have a simple graphic showing the collaboration and partnering process, looking at the four phases of the partnership or collaboration process. So we move from the planning stage, we're getting everything together, the implementation, where we're delivering services, goods, or facilities or whatnot, the evaluation phase, which is where we look back and see how well we did in attaining our goals, and then the adjustment if needed. So if we're going to make an adjustment and start the process over again, or if we're going to look at the termination. So let's look at a couple of different ways of viewing this entire process for collaborations and partnerships. So here we're looking at a stakeholders plan for partnership. These are steps for developing the partnership. So the first one, we conduct search process based on needs of community and organizations. So this is where we're looking at different needs of the community and the different goals and objectives of organizations, right? So what are the needs of the community? What are we trying to do? Then we want to identify expected partnering outcomes, products, programs based on our needs. So with these different agencies, what are their outcomes they're looking for, and what programs are they looking to deliver? Number 3, hold a workshop on how to achieve outcomes, products, or programs. So this is really the different agencies or people that might enter the partnership come together, and they look at overall what outcomes, products, programs, facilities they're looking to work with, and what their identified goals and objectives are. Next one is developing a contractual agreement or a partnering charter. Really what we're looking at here is we're putting pen to paper. This is what agency A will do, agency B will do, and so forth. And then looking at those different things we mentioned earlier, such as termination clauses or adjustment clauses within that. Next, you want to hold regular meetings, and this is something I would actually put in a contractual agreement, is when meetings will be held and how those will be facilitated. But hold regular meetings, whether that's just to catch up or if they're working meetings on how to identify and overcome issues throughout the process. And then finally, we want to conduct an evaluation and review of our outcomes, products, programs, services, all that. So really looking at, did we achieve the goals we wanted to and at what level? And here we have the steps for building partnerships and collaborations. So we're looking at three phases. We're looking at number one, defining the problem, which is called problem setting. So this is really just looking at the community and really at being very specifically an identification of what we want to look at. Number two, direction setting, and this is when we establish ground rules. This is when we're looking at this is what we think we'll do, this is what you think you will do, and so forth. And then really drawing parameters around how each can benefit from the other, stuff like that. And then third is implementation of the agreement. So this is when we, put the rubber to the road kind of thing. This is when we're going to start doing things that we said we would do in the contract or when we establish the ground rules. So it is important to remember that a good partnership is formed when needs and the outcomes are very well identified and understood by all parties. Here, let's look at the steps for building partnerships and collaborations. And this is really going to be looking at a 5-step process. So the first one obviously is educating yourself on the partnership as far as the agencies you're working with, the problems you want to identify, and even the stakeholders you're going to be working with. The next, and this is just a general review kind of thing. Next step would be conduct a needs assessment and a resources inventory. So looking at the needs of the community or the stakeholders, the needs of the various organizations, and looking at the resources. What is provided already related to the services or needs that are going to be within this partnership. After that, you'll look at identifying prospective partners. So really, you've already got a good idea of what kind of partnerships or what kind of organizations and agencies are out there providing similar services. So you want to look at which ones would be more optimal partners for whatever service or goods you're going to be working with. After that, you're going to develop a partnering proposal. So that's meeting together and basically outlining what you think might work as far as working together. And the final stage of that is going to be drafting a written document. This is the contract or memorandum of understanding or whatever you want to call it, where both sides are generally agreeing to some outlined principles. So let's look at a summary here. It's important to remember that parks, recreation, tourism, sport, leisure services, and all that are committed to facilitating and enabling whatever approach is needed for service delivery. There's a complex intergovernmental and governmental agreement system that we need to navigate as well. So we need to understand who can be in agreements, whether it be collaborative, partnership, or contractual, and who cannot. Private and nonprofit sectors for delivery of recreation, parks, and recreation services. Overall, there's a lot to be had there with different partnerships and contracts. So whether it's mutually beneficial outcomes or just simply contracting out for a service, there's a lot of benefits to that if done correctly. Additionally, we want to realize that there are some serious issues to consider, whether it's fiscal issues related to money or contracts, risk management, so who's going to take on what risk, and accountability for who's going to oversee these different agreements and whatnot. There are constraints of governing boards and commissions so that are suspicious sometimes to the motives of the other organizations. So, the management or the people involved in organizations may think they have a great agreement. We're both going to work together on a great cause and a great service, whatnot. And then we have governing boards or whatnot that are just for whatever reason suspicious of the other one. What are they getting out of this that was going to cause detriment to us, I guess. Sometimes managers are unaware or unwilling to collaborate based on lack of awareness of community needs. So this is coming down a step, right? And sometimes you got to face it. The managers or the administration or whatever one it may be of whatever organization or department are just unwilling based on some kind of factor that you're not don't understand, or you do understand it doesn't make any sense. Sometimes this is just a lack of awareness. Sometimes it's just stubbornness and so forth. But overall, recognize that there is a trend toward partnering, collaborating, and joint ventures among recreation, parks, leisure, human services providers. That includes tourism and sport as well. The more that budgets tighten and resources are limited, and the more people want a diversity of offerings, the more likely it is to have these partnerships, collaboration, joint ventures, and contracts, and all that. That concludes our presentation on collaboration and cooperative agreements.